r/AskReddit by Reddit and chill. Landlords. What is the stupidest reason you've had to evict someone? Guy got evicted from university housing because he was using the fire sprinkler head as the end point of a clothesline. This broke the sprinkler head. Flooded half my floor, 4th floor, and every apartment underneath down to the base level. I work in insurance. Specifically subrogation. You have no idea how many sprinkler head claims we get. Cause some dumbass guests in a hotel hung their clothes on it. I had a claim that I had pics of the hanger on the sprinkler. Literally above a sign that says don't hang clothing on this. People are ducking stupid. Had to evict someone for not using the shower curtain. They took a long shower and flooded their bathroom, which ran down and flooded the apartment below them. We lost the downstairs tenant as well. Plus insurance wouldn't cover the damages since it wasn't from a burst pipe or other plumbing issue. Then when they were evicted they asked for their damage deposit back. We lost the downstairs tenant as well. Damn. You really buried the lead there. Drowned by his upstairs neighbor. What a way to go. They built a turtle habitat without permission in the basement. Heard this story secondhand from a friend who knows the tenant. They started a turtle breeding business. So they decided to flood the basement with maybe 6 inches of water. The entire basement. It was a concrete floor. But there was still drywall on the wall. Don't know how the landlord found out. Or how long they had the habitat. But he kicked them out immediately. No notice. It was either leave now or he'd sue for damages. Next day they were out. This is so far the most underrated response to the question. I mean it involves a turtle habitat. Not me but one of my college friend was evicted by his landlord because he was ducking landlord's daughter. Would be even better if he kept ducking her and moved in with the daughter. Not a landlord. But when I was living in a dorm there was a mysterious case of small plastic bags filled with poo appearing on a tree in front of the dorm building overnight. How did they get there? A foreign student seemed to have had some kind of toilet shyness and didn't want to use the shared dorm restrooms. So he did his business into small plastic bags. He then decided, instead of discarding those bags discreetly, to just throw the bags out of his window into the tree at night. This didn't go well with the facility management of the dorm and he lost his dorm room. Had a similar thing happen in my first year dorm. One floor kept finding plastic bags of shit in the bathroom garbage bins. Cleaning staff almost went on strike. Somehow we got it in our collective heads it was this one international girl who didn't speak much, not sure if because language barrier or shyness. Or both, and one of us confronted her when we caught her in the hall. She never left her room but to go to class. The shit baggies stopped and she moved out the next week. Had a tenant who started gutting the apartment and selling off the appliances that came with it. Ray. Ripping the copper wiring out of your walls and selling it for beer money is ducked. My dorm mate freshman year got evicted for rolling through the hallway on an office chair blasting a big fire extinguisher. What an absolute madlad. Fell asleep making bacon and lit the entire house on fire. They just wanted to wake back up to the smell of crackling bacon. My dad's the landlord but I'm technically second voice of the property. We own the house next door for renting purposes. This tenant was the definition of I'll pay you eventually. She only talks to my dad if she needs help. Otherwise she avoids us. But I'll get back to that. This woman had a dog and all that time we thought it was hers. She treated it like garbage. Barely took care of it. One day she left this little puppy in the snow and my mom was furious. Before we could call over the dog to give him some warmth, the tenant walked out, grabbed him and slammed the door. She would keep using pet fees as an excuse to hold off on rent and we learned that A, she was lying and B, the dog wasn't even hers. From what I put together, she held her ex's dog hostage and took it out on him by not taking good care of him. My dad, after realizing it, went to confront her and she hid from him. Then drove away, claiming she had a party to go to. My dad blocked the driveway with his car and said he's move it once she pays her rent. She was so hysterical. It got to the point where she got her dad involved. But he ended up taking our side. Her dad paid the rent, sent the dog back and we were done with her. Edit. I see a lot of people were skeptical about my dad blocking the driveway. To clarify, he wasn't blocking her in. He was blocking her out from when she returned. Also, she didn't likely go to her party. She was just trying to avoid him. And this is in Canada, so the laws slightly vary. It definitely would have been illegal if he blocked her in. Either way, this didn't last very long. So it wasn't something that put her in danger. Finally, a good father of a bad kid. My sister used to have some duplexes she rented out. One tenant was several months late on payments, and numerous times the tenant promised she was working on getting the money. My sister was being nice because the tenant was in a hard spot and recovering. One day she went by to visit, and the tenant had a brand new tattoo sleeve all the way down her arm. When confronted about why the money wasn't used to pay rent, the tenant said they really wanted the tattoo. The eviction process started immediately. Tenant left all the windows open in rainstorms apparently and didn't clean up water that blew in, and every single window in the house was rotted and had black mold. They asked for their deposit back. Got. And to think I felt guilty asking for my last deposit back because the landlord gave me shit about a 2-inch stain on the carpet near the front door. My landlord had to evict the 2 young men living in the basement apartment. They got into a habit of terrorizing the poor old lady living on the first floor. And they would also always turn the heat of the building up to 45°C. It was a huge fire hazard. Let's say we were happy they left. The heat control for the whole building shouldn't be accessible to the tenants. Not a landlord. But I knew a guy in college that moved into an off-campus apartment with his friends. Because he was completely broke and irresponsible, he didn't add himself to their lease in an attempt to avoid fees for additional occupants. And he didn't pay rent to his roommates. About a year later, his friends graduated and moved out. And they gave him plenty of warning so that he could get his shit together and move out. He did exactly nothing. The landlord came and told him that he had to vacate because the lease had ended. Which lead to the dumbest excuses I've ever heard in my life. Well, this isn't my apartment, so it's not my job to pay rent. I just live here. Later on Facebook, he tried to twist this into a sob story. Can you believe they just evicted me? I can answer that. Tenant was growing weed in the house. Other tenants were complaining. Called in and told him to get rid of it. I don't care about it being illegal, it is where I am. But I take the complaints from the other tenants seriously. He said he would. Couple of days later the other tenants call and say the plant is still there. So I met him and said, if you don't get rid of the plant now, I'm calling the cops. He said call them. So I did. Arrested and evicted in one easy motion. What an idiot. My dad was a landlord and one of the tenants tore out the cabinet doors and replaced them with chicken wire and put chickens in the cabinets. What the duck? My husband and I just bought a new rental and had to evict one of the tenants because they were running an illegal water ice business out of the home. The previous owner had to pay user/occupancy fines before the sale could clear, and we didn't want to risk being on the hook for those same fines when the tenant inevitably started the business up again. Edit. I forgot water ice is a regional thing. It's a dessert thing in Philly. It's like Italian ice or a slushy. They were selling frozen treats out of the house, which is illegal because the house wasn't zoned as a business. What's an illegal ice water business? I have never heard of that. Not the landlord, son of the landlord. Parent had to evict tenants because they kept damaging stuff in the house, then taking my parent to court to demand it be fixed. One tenant is now in jail for breaking back into the house to rob me after being evicted. Not much of a silver lining, but the dude in jail didn't have to worry about rent for a while. I'm not a landlord but a property manager, so manage properties on behalf of landlords. We had a group of tenants that climbed out of their kitchen window to smoke on the flat roof outside. Fell through and caused tons of damage to the shop immediately below, then attempted to have a pop at us as we never informed them that they couldn't climb out of the window. Later that tenancy, one of the same tenants, there were 4 total. 2 involved in the roof thing, put a pan on the hob then forgot about it, which set fire to the kitchen. They complained that the ash aggravated their asthma. They didn't seem to understand why their tenancy wasn't renewed and why we kept their deposit. She kept shutting off the power to the Airbnb unit above her. Also, she assaulted an Airbnb guest. That was pretty dumb of her. Every tenant we've evicted was for not paying rent for 3+ months. And since in our country, the electric bill has to be in the property owner's name, we get to pay their electric bills as well. Or the next tenant wouldn't have electricity. Our second to last tenant abandoned a cat at the apartment, so we had to deal with a cat and cat shit and cat food scattered around the place. The last tenant randomly brought home a huge ass dog, no yard, that they never walked and just left on the terrace all day and night. The dog destroyed the walls on the terrace, some walls inside the apartment, and the walls on the rooftop patio. We also had to clean the massive amounts of dog shit and piss left everywhere. I hate being a landlord. Something makes me think that running background checks and references would minimize all of that nonsense. Not a landlord, but a friend of mine just had to evict someone from a home she owned after the following convo. T equals tenant. F equals friend. T. As per my text, I won't be paying rent this month. Took her a couple weeks to get a court date, but said tenant is now out of the property with a shitload of bills now in collections. I know landlords have it tough, but $50 a day in late fees is kinda crazy. If your paychecks just happen to line up poorly in a month, then you just get ducked into a hole you can't dig out of. Obligatory, not a landlord, but my dorm mate got evicted for getting really drunk, having to throw up, not wanting to do it in the toilet, and against me and my friend telling him not to. Smashed the window and puked out the window onto a car. Kicked him out, but not me and my friend, meaning we had to pick up extra rent money. Is that how you came up with your username? I currently have a tenant who hasn't paid rent in 3 months. Come Friday it will be 4 months. We have to wait until December to have the hearing to decide whether he will be evicted. He won't, I promise, and at that point he will owe me 5 months rent. Edit. This is Ontario, Canada. They run on the assumption that landlord equals scumbag and tenant equals poor victim. Not to say that isn't often the case, but still. My parents were landlords in Canada. My dad once gave a dude that was always late on rent, sold drugs and had the cops to the building all the time, 10 grand to just go away so the other tenants wouldn't all move out. I helped my father evict a tenant from the second house he owned and was renting out. The house had a small secure garage attached to it, but rather than use this to repair his motorbikes, the tenant had 3 of them inside the house. 2 in the living room, in bits, and 1 in the spare room upstairs, also in bits. Oil everywhere. He'd spilt at least 1 gallon of oil downstairs, which had soaked into the carpet and floor underneath. He'd taken the carpet up and thrown it in the garden. Upstairs there were numerous small spills. Carpet wrecked again. Dirty handprints all over the doors and walls, especially on the stairwell, kitchen cupboards and so on. We found out as the neighbors were complaining about the smell of petrol. He had a leaking fuel tank in the kitchen, on the draining board. It was very slow, so thankfully he hadn't blown the house up. But the kitchen stank, along with the outside drain. My father had a clause in the rental agreement that specifically prohibited any kind of workshop type activity in the house. No woodwork, pottery, engine repairs, etc. So it was fairly easy to evict him. Took 2 months. He didn't even ask for his deposit back and left 2 of the bikes behind. 2 shitty old Hondas that were beyond repair. My father sold them for a few quid to help pay for the repairs to the house. This thread is testament to the reason I will never become a landlord. A few times in my 50 years, people have approached me about buying a property jointly and then renting it out. One fellow tried selling me his rental property. All I need is to read threads like this to be convinced that I never want that headache. Bought a duplex with the intent of renting out the upper floor to cover the mortgage. Wife and I moved into the bottom unit. Rented to a young couple who had a nice letter of recommendation from their previous landlord at a very nice everything included price of $450 for the term of 1 year only. After that year, I probably won't rent ever again. Moving his dad and hiding him from us into a 1-bedroom apartment with a tiny kitchenette. Where was the event sleeping? Smoking in the apartment despite being caught multiple times. Never paid rent on time and always had the late fee tacked on. Brought her kids in and hid them from us after her ex got evicted himself. Nothing against kids, but I'm highly certain CPS would have had a field day with 2 kids and 3 adults in a 1-bedroom apartment. Best of all, the letter of recommendation from their previous landlord was only written to get them out of their last place because they had bedbugs. We found that out the hard way in the last month they were there. Didn't pay the last 3 months of rent and called the police on us when we obviously didn't return the security deposit. Overall, it was an expensive lesson that we learned. Ducking like and subscribe.